Talofa, my name is Christian Fandini Schmidt. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm Samoan, I'm gay, and I'm very excited to introduce to you our panelists for today, consisting of the fabulous Phylesha Brown-Acton, the exquisite Ymania Brown-Gabriel, the beautiful Becks Lafo'ou Lusa, and the voluptuous Joleen Mataele. These ladies have a wealth of experience and expertise in leadership in the Pacific, especially in our trans and non-binary communities, and that's what brings us here today.
My name is Ymania. I'm involved in LGBTI activism at a global level. I'm the Co-Secretary General of ILGA World and the first Samoan or person from the Pacific to hold the role, and also a trans Whawhawhine. My pronouns are she, her, and sunga. If I accidentally hear sole, that's okay too, you know, as long as you understand that the sole comes with a mole. So, you know, the work that I do, I've been trying now for about a year and a half to register an NGO called the Pacific Human Rights Initiative. And it hasn't been registered in Samoa because of some issues. So we're now about to be registered probably next week in Queensland. And then officially we will exist. So the idea of the Pacific Human Rights Initiative is to not have an LGBTI focus in our activism, but to practice what we preach, which is to have an intersectional approach. So we're going to have a women's desk, a gender-based violence desk, we're going to have an environment desk, we're going to have an LGBTI desk under Trans Pacifica. So that all these issues that are important to us in the Pacific, that's what our focus is. Because many times, and you've heard this from many people and other experts, we're not single issue people leading single issue lives. We are multifaceted issue people, and especially living in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So, and that's me.
So talofa and malele everyone. My name is Becks Lafo'ou Lusa. I am from Auckland, born and raised in the South Side. Mangere 275, what's good? You already know. So just a bit about me and my background. So my dad is Tongan, my mum is Samoan, and they gave birth to all of us. So my background is I studied at AUT University in Auckland. I completed a Bachelor of Health Science. I then went on to do my postgrad honours also in health science. I then naturally went on to work for AUT for a bit. And that's when I got heavily involved with the UniPrep project, where I was fortunate enough to be the project lead this year, alongside one of my colleagues, Noah Mataele. And I am also studying down here in Dunedin. So I'm currently based in Dunedin. I'm in my third year of a Bachelor of Medicine and Surgery at the University of Otago. And yeah, that's pretty much me at the moment. I will say at the forefront that I haven't done a lot of heavy work, particularly focused solely on LGBTQI communities. So I'm looking forward to this Talanoa and just seeing what I'm able to, I guess, contribute. But for the most part, I'm fortunate and blessed to be alongside these panelists with a lot more expertise than I have. So I'm both looking forward to sharing, but also learning as well through this Talanoa. So thank you for having me.
Malolele, my name is Joleen Mataele, and my pronouns is she, her, herself. I'm the executive director and co-founder of the Tongolese Association, and also a representative of the Pacific for the Trust, which is based in UK, in United Kingdom. And the work that I do, even though the title is executive director, but I'm more on the field all the time, fighting with everyone, you know.
My name is Phylesha Brown-Acton. I hail from the village of Whineoneha, Niue Island. I was born and raised in Auckland, New Zealand. And I'm the director of an organization called Fine Pacifica Aotearoa, which is a organization funded under Whānau Order, which is a New Zealand government initiative. I work primarily with Pacifica LGBTQI individuals and their families in Auckland, and supporting them with their own self-determined, goal-orientated action plans, aspirations. And we work across the domains of education, employment, culture, community leadership, health and financial literacy around money management, debt reduction. And I've, not by accident, I don't think I ever wanted to aspire to be working, serving our LGBTQI communities, but I've always, my mentors saw something in me that I didn't. And I want to acknowledge also the mentors over the many years that have kept me honest in serving people, in particular my community, and I've done so for the last 20 odd years. It's been a long ride, and yeah, I'm most happy to be here and to be a part of the discussion. Thank you.
So the way this kind of came about is I had to review Disclosure Trans Lives on Screen, and if you haven't seen it, it's on Netflix, and it talks about all the ways that Hollywood has played into the dehumanization of trans people, you know, through television and film, and how that directly translates to discrimination and violence against trans people. And when we think about our communities in the Pacific, you know, Hollywood and all its productions don't necessarily have the same impact on us, but there are other things that do. And that's where I want to start, please, ladies.
I was just going to suggest that Becks, since you are new to, you know, and the young person in this panel, us Almakuas can give you a chance to speak from what you, you know, sorry, Phylesha, but, you know, truth hurts. But
I think for the longest time, we've all known that government, religion, and culture aren't as progressive as we would like. And I think so for what we've seen is we've just made it what it is and what we have. And I think it's become something beautiful, but it's just unfortunate that those concepts haven't evolved with us with time. And I think a part of it is just the unwillingness. And I'm not too sure if it's fear. I think a lot of it is they're not too sure whether or not they want to move from a construct that they're so familiar with so many years that they don't want to move away from something that they're so comfortable with.
When I watched Disclosure, Christian, and you know, I thought it quite very interesting. It was a poignant learning moment for me to sort of see trans activists from the US sort of unpick how these systems have basically taught people how to be quite negative towards trans people. And I think when we're thinking about the relationship in culture, religion, and government, colonization has absolutely brought that to the forefront of the way in which we experience negative things that impact us as Pacifica trans-identifying, whether you're whakawhiwhine or what have you not. So for me, I sort of understood it because my lived experience through not just being situated within a Niuean context or a Pacific context, or an Aotearoa New Zealand context, or a Asia Pacific context, or a global context, the same satire and the same abusive language and the same depictions of trans people are played out in every parts of those communities that I'm connected to. So in reflection, when I was thinking about that and sort of taking from it what I did, even though I know that that is absolutely what's experienced in the US, I could also see how it plays itself right through all of the communities that I'm connected with. We have our own relationships with the religion. And for me, it's not about having a discussion around the role that religion plays, because when we think about trans, and I'm just purely speaking from a trans perspective, and I hate using that word, sorry, because I don't connect to it like I do whakawhiwhine, because one aspect, it's sort of a very Western term that frames me and labels me and situates me in a box. And I think so when we connect it to that discussion on around language, I think it'll be good for us to talk more about that. And then I also don't connect with rainbow, because Niuean people believed that the rainbow symbolized our most ancient god, Talanoa, which was, you know, if you looked into the rainbow, it would bring a bad omen to your plantation. And then I struggle with the fact that I connect to a symbol that was, you know, designed by a man that probably, you know, he was challenged by Harvey Milk to come up with a symbol that represented the community. And I think at the point when he did design it in the 70s, or when it was, I don't think he knew anything about what it was to be whakawhiwhine or whawhawhine or leiti or mahu or wakasalewa or palopa, or the things that we experience as a result of colonization and the things that oppress us. But also we have indigenous connections and understandings of the very symbol that they were trying to represent in terms of a community. So I think it's actually really interesting how from a global North perspective to a global South perspective to a situating the dialogue or, within the Pacific context, how far removed people can disconnect themselves from actually thinking that there are probably other cultures and communities and identities that are not sitting at the table that have to live with these same types of ideals or identities that are not necessarily helpful in our own context in the Pacific.
If you want to look at an example that intricately links this whole conundrum of culture, religion, and government, look no further than in our own Pacific backyard. Look at the recent comments made by Israel Folau, right? Israel Folau came out, you know, said some pretty incendiary remarks, you know. He's a prominent sports person within the Tongan community and Pacific Island community, and everybody took sides. You know what I mean? Everybody was like, I stand with Folau, right? The hashtag, you know, and all the human rights activists and all the ones that said, well, no, not really, I don't stand with Folau. The most important thing we have to remember about religion is that they are so good at picking and choosing the sins that they want to air out in public, but not their own sins. Recent case in Samoa, you know, a husband got a custodial sentence. You know, he avoided going to jail for hitting his wife or pushing his wife or knocking his wife, and she ended up dying. She slipped and fell and died, right? This is the court system. This is the laws. This is what they're doing, you know? They're kind of like they're making it okay to hit a woman and die and then not go to jail. And that message is so loud and so powerful to young men that it's okay to do that. And it's not. You know, that for people like Folau to come out and attack people that sin differently to him, that it's okay to do that, and it's not. You know what I mean? Like this is rampant within Pacific Island communities, and that's a downside of this interlinkage between culture, religion, and government. Is, you know, people can insert themselves. While we insert ourselves in there for safety reasons, other people will insert themselves in there and try and wedge, you know, drive a wedge between those three and kind of like, you know, I mean, you know, Phylesha, Joleen, and Becks, and myself, we're not snakes in the Garden of Eden. I mean, I'm sorry, but we are wonderfully created by God, and we, you know, we have every right to exist. And like, if we were to collectively list all the sins of Leviticus that everybody else is sinning, I mean, hello, Kmart and your mixed fabrics, you know, you should be stoned to death for that. Like, come on now, you know, leave us alone, you know, leave us alone so we can contribute and love our communities and, you know, and take care of the elderly.
I had to go and deal with that at school with my daughters, because my daughter was being harassed by some of the rugby players, the student rugby players, and, you know, cursing her that, you know, your mother is a whakareti, you know, and when and all that, and come to find out, it was taken because from Israel Folau that we were sinners. You know, they're followers of Israel Folau, and he doesn't know the impact that he has of what he says, you know, on these students, and it becomes a problem for our children, for us trans parents, you know. And those are the things that I think where the role of the church or the role of the parents or the role of our community should look at, you know.
I agree absolutely with Joleen, and thank you for bringing up Israel Folau as well, Ymania, even though I try not to have this conversation, because I think if Israel had a concern around his religious views, the process of addressing that in a Tongan way is to go in Talanoa with the very community that he has a problem with. But he decided to take it from and I think this is the other thing quite interesting about it, is nobody talks about who backs him. Like, this is an evangelical, you know, global North, American, white-centric, a very destructive power that sits behind an individual that contributes money. So that's something that a lot of people don't see. And we know that he's receiving money for what he says. But on the other side of that I have an issue with was the rainbow capitalists that came out and decided to go on this whole process of raising money for their organizations. Understandably, how that rhetoric is very harmful to a number of LGBTQI individuals. But the issue I have with that is, one, nobody wants to talk about it from understanding it from a Leitis perspective and the impact that it has on the Leiti, the Tongan Leiti community, because they're the ones that are having to manage these relationships as a result of Israel Folau being a Tongan. And these are the multiple complexities, again, that when we start to think about how things play out in the bigger picture, they often do not play out in the bigger picture that involve panelists like that are sitting here today, or the very community that people like Israel Folau are coming from, because they forget that people like Joleen are related to them, they're connected through their church families, there are cultural concepts that need to be upheld and taken on board, but nobody decides to do that. Everybody just wants to get in a shit fight, and everybody wants to use this to generate money. So my whole thing around this is that if we continue to situate this business aspect behind and it becomes an invisible thing, it's really hard to understand context around individuals' values, beliefs, and principles, because you don't get to see that, you don't get to understand it. So I get really annoyed by the simple fact that people choose religion as the easy option for something to hide behind, but it's actually not about that at the end of the day. It's just the easier thing to hide behind in order to say what they need to say to grow their wealth, and to, you know, to be and to be careless in the way in which they do it. And to the point that Ymania was talking around the domestic violence, we have a community that will just stand behind it for the sake of standing behind it, because they have a relationship with religion that probably I don't, and maybe many others don't. So it becomes complex and nuanced, but it also is, again, very destructive and abusive.
When we talk about colonialism, right, we're not just talking about one situation of colonialism. We're talking about multiple situations of colonialisms. It's not a colonialism singular, it's colonialism plural, right? It's not just we were colonized as a people, you know, in our lands. We were also colonized in our minds and in our thinking. You know, we were colonized through religion. We had our own gods that we worship. We worship the god of the trees and the god of the insects and the god of the ants. You know what I mean? The god of our crops. We worship them. They introduced another god. We pay tribute to that. You know, speaking about colonialism, and it's only a part of the complete basket of Pandora's box of evils that came through. It's not just colonialism. We need to talk about capitalism. We need to talk about white supremacy. We need to talk about the enslavement of our people. You know, and people, the Pacific people, have been enslaved over a long period of time. We need to talk about settler colonialism, as I said. We need to talk about the whole politics of imperialism, and how that has an effect in modern day Samoa with the debt slavery that Pacific countries are now ascribed to from the more wealthier countries. You know, get in debt and then that's it, right? Like there's so many things that we need to talk about to unpack that, and I think that's another session altogether, because I don't really want to, because if I talk about settler colonialism now, I feel like I'm doing injustice to white supremacy, because this is a huge thing. It is a huge thing, right? And capitalism, which is a huge thing, right? Slave labor for islanders that work in New Zealand for like pittance, and you know what I mean, for peanuts. Like, come on now, let's organize another session and let's bring in more people so we can really kind of like bang around that house of like capitalism and multi-colonialism and all of that.
I'm going to move on to the next segment. Yeah, some of the things that came up were language. You know, when you're talking about rainbow and LGBTQ and what things you can identify with and what things and what not helpful, you know. And I was just thinking about when I think about language in Samoa, I think of whakawhiwhinga, and that's just all encompassing. There's just this idea that, you know, gay equals trans equals non-binary equals, you know, it's just all a lump sum. So I guess I just wanted to talk about what what language is helpful and what's not helpful. Do we have the language to separate, you know, and I don't want to get too caught up in the because, you know, there's so many labels put upon us already.
Language is very helpful. It can be very helpful from a Western concept, right? Pronouns are so tied into this issue of a transgender identity. They're an inextricable part of the trans identity. Is it for Indigenous communities? It's not as important, because the Indigenous communities or Indigenous non-binary gender diverse identity is not about pronouns. It has always been about our tautua, you know, our service to our communities, to our families, to our immediate families, to our siblings, to our, you know, that's what being the Whakawhiwhinga identity has always been about. Ola tautua, tautua alofa, you know, live a life of service and serve with love. It is helpful. Language is very helpful when we navigate Western ideologies, right? But let's not get caught up in the Western side of it. Let's celebrate things like the MVP-FAF acronym that Phylesha and Joleen and myself had been pushing, because we resonate with those acronyms.
MVP-FAF stand for?
Mahu wakasalewa palopa whawhawhine akawaine whakawhiwhine and whakaleti o leti. At the point when that mnemonic was put forward at the Outgames Human Rights Conference in Wellington, it was basically in response to Marilyn Waring's point that she had made around to the Human Rights Conference, that we need to be mindful of LGBTQI narratives, that they're not all necessarily helpful to other identities. And so that was a response between, you know, discussions with Joleen, going over the Tasman Sea with Ymania and typing my keynote, that's what came out of it.
Only last week, the term MVP-FAF is now recognized in New Zealand Aotearoa curriculum officially for the first time. So Phylesha, do you want to speak a little bit about that? Because this is like goosebumpy, kind of like proud moments for all of us. Phylesha?
So in the history of the education curriculum, there have been no helpful things that have helped Pacific learners aspire, but also around the racism and the prejudice that they experience from educators. And this goes from early entry into education right through to academic. And kudos to the Honourable Jenny Salesa, who was the minister when the education plan was being set by government, identified, hang on a minute, you people haven't engaged Pacifica communities. And hang on another minute, you haven't engaged Pacifica rainbow communities. So my organization was reached out to as a result of her saying you need to get in contact with Whine Pacifica Aotearoa and Phylesha, and they need to lead the consultation. So we had 3 consultations that were led. Now, prior to any education plan, there hasn't been anything related to discrimination, racism, or even mention in the Pacifica education plan related to LGBTQI or MVP-FAF. So they have 6 overarching objectives and a 10-year plan from 2020 to 2030, which basically outline the key things that they're going to be committing to improve things for Pacific learners. And of the key 6 objectives, they have 5 key system shifts. And of those system shifts, 1 explicitly is representative of discrimination, racism, and prejudice, being a pillar that needs to be significantly changed, but explicitly related to discrimination and prejudice for Pacifica LGBTQI MVP-FAF individuals. And I think that's a win for all of us in terms of our advocacy and activism across the years around challenging, you know, the use of our own terminologies and understanding our identities and the nuances that come with that. And I think as a result also, one thing that's been key is that we haven't shunned our Pacific leaders who are in positions of power or privilege. we've maintained very key relationships with them, and trusted and safe and secure relationships. And that's been done over a long period of time. So I'm not surprised when the Honourable Jenny Phylesha actually said, you know, that's as a result of the relationships that a number of us have maintained with her. And it just is not as a result of the relationships here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's the relationships that Joleen and the Tongolese Teas Association also have with the Minister. It's the relationships that Ymania and Yuki and Ken and Becks and Dr. Patrick Thompson and all of us have built and maintained over the years that continue to contribute to seeing more positive outcomes for people in our communities. And unfortunate, it is only happening at this point in time in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but I hope that we all, again, connect around looking at what the future looks like, possibilities of a global forum for all of us Pasifika, MVP, FAF, LGBTQI rainbow people, so that we can start to see this outplay itself in the bigger picture globally.
I think just on the topic of language, I'll kind of go back to what Phylesha mentioned earlier in terms of, I guess, the idea of trans. I think, as she mentioned, I too am a bit, uncomfortable with that label. I think I've just always been uncomfortable with labels in general. I've always been comfortable with who I am, but the uncomfortability sat when someone else made that decision for me, or made that identity for me, or they felt that they were in the right to decide who I was or how I should identify. And I think for me, it's always just helpful to ask someone what pronouns they prefer, but also just asking how they best feel they identify. I think there's so many terms that exist today that just is difficult for me to understand, and I'm in this community, if that makes sense. So I can only imagine how difficult it is for someone who sits outside of that to understand as well. And I think for us, it's now coming to a space of making sure that we're protecting ourselves, but also speaking out to say that actually I don't identify with that, more so because that's something you believe I should sit in, where that's actually not somewhere where I see myself. And I'm being quite honest in saying that I was a bit hesitant being on this panel, more so because it was so trans focused, but it wasn't necessarily something that I felt naturally drawn towards in terms of, but I think everyone's always just wanting to put a label on something, and that's where I don't think I sit quite comfortably with.
When we think about the word whakaleiti, there's one word that I have never liked, because it's not a Tongan word. That was brought by a Westerner researcher that came on the late 70s and use that as a Tongan word, because the word that we grew up with was whakawhawhine or whakawhewhine. The whakaleiti was not a Tongan word, and her description is like a lady, a man who dresses like a lady, or but that was never a word that we used, and it became a derogatory word. And we never liked it. And that's the reason why we took the FAKA part. When we registered the Tongolese Teas Association, we took the FAKA part because Papiloa, our first president, never liked that word too, and we just used Leiti because that's more inclusive for us. When I think about the word for Leiti, it reminds me again of when the first AIDS person was brought back home, and instead of people using whakaleiti, they turn around and call us ATC instead of calling our names. So that's, the things that we have to go through just because of people's ignorance and their kind of language they want to use against us is something that will always be, that scar will always be in us for the rest of our lives. May whoever started all that, may they rest in peace if they have passed away. But
in my experience of putting together, I'm a co-editor of the book of Samoan Queer Lives, which I co-edited with Dan Taulalapa McMullen, published by Little Island Press. So during my 11 years of working on this publication, I've tried to sort of dig into the archives, and I've gone through many, many archives to see if there are any sort of indigenous terminology to describe you know, the closest word to homosexuality, which was there's a publication that was published in 1996. So it's a Samoan dictionary that was commissioned by the governments of Western Samoa and American Samoa. And they decide to actually include the word tawatane with the English translation meaning homosexual acts between men in this dictionary.
A lot of it is to do with, and there are many examples in the Samoan language of the language itself being very lazy. Like we will attribute things to, you know, to one word that covers everything. The word fa'afafine, we all know what the literal translation is, but it's the Samoan community have then said, okay, that's the word we attribute to everybody that falls under that gender diverse, non-binary, right? So if you're gay, if you're lesbian, if you're, you know, trans, if you're intersex, everybody kind of like gets lumbered under that. Is that the right approach? Not necessarily. It's a lazy approach to language. But are we going to try and tell our people and our ancestors and our elders to say, you know what, fa'afafine doesn't work for me, I'm a gay male, I would like to change the word, so I'm suggesting this word. It doesn't actually work like that in terms of consultation. And I know that the word that Yuki's talked about, tawatane, has been, and Ken and I have had discussions about this for many years, but now when they refer to homosexual acts, usually it's a phrase that's used. So they use Phylesha. Phylesha means, you know, when somebody sleeps with somebody else, and you say Phylesha le ta'ua, meaning that, you know, these are the connections, the physical connections that shall not be talked about unless it's 4 a.m. under the cocoa tree, you know? So it's much of a muchness, but definitely there's room for it to be improved. I'm not sure of the correct process to introduce something like that. I mean, there'll be a lot of consultation, there'll be a lot of us to speak to people, but definitely it is a lazy, you know, symptom of our language where we just lumber everything together under the one thing.
But I also want to give out an acknowledgement and a shout out to also someone that we celebrate absolutely within our community, and that's not only our one and only Miss Yuki Kihara, because she is representing this freaking country at the Venice Biennale as their pinnacle of everything arts. And I just think that's a wonderful achievement to be the first in freaking history. And you know, none other than Yuki. So I just want to acknowledge that, and also what that brings to the global showcasing of fa'afafine identities and narratives. And you as a practitioner, Yuki, in arts, I think it's worth absolutely celebrating and acknowledging. And I just wanted to say mahalo.
Thank you, Phylesha. Love you all.
A lot of people have seen documentaries and they've read research where it says that fa'afafine, as a result of, you know, families with too many boys, and they've picked one to be raised as a girl because they need someone to help with domestic chores. So can you speak to that? Like, where did that come from? And can we just...
So that's never, like, that's, first of all, it's a laughable premise, and I'm not even going to devote any time to that. It seems to be like a romantic notion. Samoans like to tell tales. So maybe we told a tale to an anthropologist, hello, Margaret Mead, and we said that this is what happens. It never happens. Like, there are families that have, you know, mostly women and, you know, daughters, and the one son is a fa'afafine. Seriously, it's stupid. I don't know who started that whole thing, but it's probably a white person who kind of like said, hey, okay, you know. It's like, no, I'm not going to add anything to that.
Hey, can I just, because it was obviously it came out of this whole thing around fa'afafine, and then it was probably further perpetuated. But as a result of that happening to fa'afafine, whakawhiwhine, mahu, whakasalewa, palopa, akawaine, leiti, we all carried that same burden of the fact that, you know, yes, I have 6 brothers, but it doesn't mean, you know, and it minimizes the fact that we were born the way we were born. There's no question about it, you know. And I think people need to get over the fact that how, you know, how for me, when I heard that, or when people say that about me, I think how disrespectful to my mother. It's the same rhetoric that continues to minimize us, to, you know, label us, to keep us situated within label theorying. And again, it's unhelpful to our livelihoods, and it's unhelpful to how we view the world. It's unhelpful to the fact that it continues to put us in a place of constantly being stereotyped and marginalized, and it gives us no right or no, it makes us feel like we have no right to even imagine what opportunity or our future looks like as a result of being controlled by idiocracies and narratives that are created like that. It's unhelpful, and it's for me another form of abuse.
How can we show up? Like, what's going on with the organizations? How can we support you, within the work you do, and just as a community, what can we do?
Really, for allies, avoid tokenistic Indigenous involvement. Don't be token about your involvement. Get in and become involved. Do not take up space that's unnecessary. Suggest, ask, demand for Black and Brown, gender diverse, and non-binary voices. It's not just me, Joleen, and Phylesha, and Becks, of course. There are so many others who are so well spoken in our communities. Ask for them, ask for their voices. If you have a meeting and there's no gender diverse, the Indigenous Polynesian voice, ask for that, demand it. Community immersion. Go back to your communities, serve your communities, hands and feet. As allies, you have to stop this whole, you use us for our creative talents, and then you use religion to admonish our sins, but leave out your sins. Come on. That needs to stop. We're a part of we live in the framework of your fale, under religion, under culture, and under government, right? We are a part, we are citizens. Like, use us like properly and be prepared to hear our voices.
Just be genuinely inclusive. I think just saying on what Ymania was saying, I think a lot of the times people are looking for a tick box, like, okay, I've been inclusive, I've included someone who's specific, I've included someone who identifies across the rainbow spectrum or trans or whatever, but it's just for the sake of looking inclusive. So I think if anything, be genuinely inclusive, but also just continue to I guess empower and inspire those around you. It doesn't have to be on a global scale, as many of our panelists are, which is amazing. I think it starts within our own homes and in our own communities, like, just speaking life and love into those around you, just making sure that they're in a space where they can feel safe, and they can then go on to continue to do that for those around them too. And just that domino effect. And I think starting within our own home and communities, we'll then see that elevate and continue to see our young people grow and be in spaces where they never thought that they could. So again, just a huge thank you to our panel who are doing and making amazing waves in the spaces that they're in, because then, like someone like myself, then looking forward and seeing that that's something that I can aspire to, will only then go on to just have this diverse change and effect in everything that happens. So I think, if anything, just be genuinely inclusive. Allow more of our young people in the spaces to speak on issues. As the world and times are changing, there are definitely things that we need to be a bit more aware of. And I think just making sure that we empower all our young people, that they're capable of being in any space and not just a rainbow specific space, if that makes sense. And I think that's something I've learned to kind of include in my daily undertakings. But I think for the most part, the change that we see now is amazing with the panelists, I guess, in their own work. But in the work to come, I'm really excited to see what comes of this. But definitely support and agree with everything that Ymania's said already. Yeah.
When it comes to ticking boxes, it happens in our communities when we are dealing with, finding funds to do our work, and funders have a habit of doing that also. Ticking their boxes, and yet they're not there to actually hear and listen to us and what we talk about and what we're using their money for, And they tick their boxes. Yes, we've included the LGBT or the trans community in Samoa and in Tonga and all that, but did they really understand what we were doing? I could have just taken that money and go to Paris and, hello, go on a honeymoon. And they don't know anything about what we talked about. They didn't even know anything about our issues. They didn't even hear about our problems and what we go through with our, with our governments.
I just wanted to give a shout out to the University of Auckland. Dr. Patrick Thompson is here, to Manalangi, which is New Zealand's first Pacifica MVP FAF, LGBTQI health and wellbeing survey, which is basically going to paint a picture as a result of all of our voices to tell the government and all New Zealanders what the situation is for us in our current day in life, and the things that work against us, but what are the things that can be changed or work to make our lived experiences better than they are, and basically treated with dignity, just like, you know, every other New Zealand citizen is meant to be treated as. And then when I think about allies, I think about, and sorry, that's going to start in December this year and it's going to run for 3 years. And then when I think about allies, I think about harmful narratives and harmful politics that happen in other places in the world that are used by our own decision makers or leaders who take those things that are not relative to us and use it against us. That you be mindful of that, and that when we call for your support, that you hear us when we talk about these things, because they have a way of playing themselves out, just like the Israel-Folau situation, which has a greater force that sits behind it, but often people don't talk about that or see it. I also think that calling out harmful behavior when you see it or you hear it on the likes of social media platforms is not helpful, and basically being proactive and reporting harmful stuff like that, because this is how you shut down these trolls, rather than just seeing it and then just moving on. Actually report things like this when you see them. And then I guess when it does come to lobbying efforts, wherever it may be within in the Pacific, or even here in New Zealand, in my context, helping us change the systems and processes that don't work for us. And currently for trans people, and I use the identity trans politically because it connects my gender transition, my medicine connection, my relationship with medical professionals. That is the way in which I use trans as an identity term. But what's not helpful is the fact that there are still some people out there that, well, a lot of people actually, if you've seen the J.K. Rowling rants that she's had on Twitter, where she's basically saying that trans women are men, and this is supported by, again, another made up narrative or rhetoric created by people who just see us in the worst possible way, and they're using, you know, evidence which is just not scientific, or trying to say that it's scientific, and using it as a platform to basically minimize. And I can give you an example of this. The Birth, Deaths, Marriages and Relationships Act in New Zealand has been put on hold basically as a result of these people influencing. And that amendment to the Act was meant to make it easier for people like myself to be able to change my gender marker on my birth certificate, because when I go to apply for a job, or when I go to a university, or when I'm asked to produce ID, they're no longer asking for my passport, because my passport says I'm female and it says Phylesha Brown Acton. What they're asking for now is my birth certificate. And I find that really harmful and detrimental to people like myself who are being restricted opportunity, whether they should be afforded it based on their own merit, or the fact that they shouldn't have to be asked for that, because every other cisgendered person doesn't get to produce their birth certificate. So thinking about those things, thinking about the nuances that we experience within the community, understanding that, and not being a spokesperson on behalf, but just being there with us side by side, supporting with us, because it is a numbers game at the end of the day. When it comes to decision making, we are not a factor, because we're a minority in the bigger picture of the voters, of the, you know, all of these things that contribute to how systems and processes are held. So the more people that stand with us in amplifying our voices and our visibility and the issues that impact us, you know, being there with us helps us grow the numbers to support our many platforms and the issues that we face within our daily lives. Yeah, so that's what I want to contribute. Thank you.
I just want to encourage everyone who's watching to follow the ladies in here on social media, you know, whether it's on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, or, you know, you only know what's going on in the communities if you talk to the people who are in the communities. And that's a way that you can see what they're doing, the events they're holding, and the discussions they're having, and how you can engage that way and support in that way. Yeah, I guess I know that you have the article that we've posted the link to, Phylesha's article. Are there any other projects that you ladies would like us to check out that you want to plug?
We're going to do a GoFundMe page for Joleen to help her with her staying in Canberra. So you can all contribute, you know.
And don't laugh about it, Joleen, because honestly, like, you got kicked off the flight by Air New Zealand because you were not a New Zealand resident. And as a result of that action, you have been stuck in Australia for what, 4 months?
And imagine if you didn't have family in Australia. Imagine if you'll be the lady that's homeless somewhere in Brisbane, because you were kicked off in Brisbane, like.
And you've had no control of it. And I think Yuki raised a very poignant point that because you don't have children or the whole thing around the way in which you should be repatriated back to your family, to your to your work and what have you not, you've been restricted because they don't see you as someone that has, dependence and what have you not. So it's something that we all should get behind and support, because, not as a result of your own actions. You've been stuck in a country where you have no access to any revenue, any support. And luckily you do have family members and people like Ymania that have been supporting you through this. But I couldn't imagine anybody else in that situation, let alone me, thinking, gosh, I don't know what it would be like and what I have to put up with to be in a country that I have no support or no acknowledgement of you being there, other than the fact that you're just an illegal alien who's just sitting in a country waiting to be repatriated by back to your country, and that was at no fault of your own.
I know we're all human rights activists, and we do the work that we do because we're passionate about it. But the most important thing that I've learned on this lockdown and being stuck here for 4 months is, when I was with, and I thank God for Ymania for being there for me on those first 2 weeks that I was stranded in Australia. I had no other people to contact. Thank God Ymania was online that very day, because Australia hasn't given the okay for the free accommodation until a week later, And then I had to find someone to go, or somewhere to go and stay. So Ymania was there online. She had to leave her job to come and pick me up and take me and to self-isolate in her house, her home for about 2 weeks. But what I learned on this was the importance for us activists. At the end of the day, who will take care of you? As activists, the importance of well-being and self-care. And we need to, we need to be prepared for things for crises like this, because we deal with a lot of issues. We deal with every Tom, Dick, and Harry's issues, problems that they come with to your centers to deal with. As a counselor, when this hits you, I tell you, your total mental health goes, I don't know. I think if I wasn't cared for by Ymania, I think I would have gone nuts. I was sitting there at the airport. The airport was already closed. I was only there with the securities, and we couldn't even, I didn't even know what to do. And when even though I was cared for by Ymania in her house and her children, there was something missing inside you. Your emotions, everything was just, I was in her room crying a lot of nights, what is happening? Why, you ask God, what happened? You've done your job to save other people's lives. But then when this hits you as a activist, it's really, really something that we need to think about it. the importance of self-care, and we need to take care of ourselves as excellence.
If you are out there in the world viewing and you happen to stumble across Ladies in Waiting, which Madam Joleen is features in, if you happen to see that, please do. And also Kumuhina Le Moana Wong Kalu's Kapai Mahu and Kumuhina, if those are key things. I'm going to see Kapai Mahu very shortly. So go out there and see those, I know. They're fantastic visual depictions of the things, and I think Kapai Mahu for me in particular is asking a key question around why is it Mahu have been erased from the history.
Erasure of indigenous, trans identities from their cultures.
For anyone who's not aware of what UniPrep is, it's just a transition program for high school leavers into the university space. They don't have to be looking to go to university to do the program. However, they will leave with skills, I guess, that will hopefully help them in life after high school. Our key focus is definitely those, I guess, from underprivileged backgrounds or those from low socioeconomic groups. But what it is that we love to do is just empower our young people in those spaces. So if there's any year 13s that you know, please let them know that UniPrep is definitely an option for them. If you have any questions at all about the program, I'm more than happy to answer them if you want to just message through. But also just a huge thank you to my fellow panelists for just your amazing insight and just the learnings that I got today. And thank you also to Christian for hosting us. I really appreciate it. And for everyone who's tuned in today.
And are we having Q&A?
That's up to you. Do you have time? Does everyone have time?
Yes.
Okay.
One of the things that we didn't touch on language is this whole idea of the voices of us speaking for ourselves. And the Manalangi project, man, it's like we are now going to finally speak about our own issues in the Aotearoa New Zealand, diaspora. Finally, we are now going to be. You're going to hear our voices. We're not going to hear Palangi voices trying to decipher and interpret what we want, from within New Zealand, our Aotearoa New Zealand, and it's such an amazing thing is that, our voices are going to be like rising, people are going to be hearing what we want to say about the whole Manalangi project. So well done, Patrick, Dr. Patrick Thompson, well done. And also Phylesha, who's going to be a part of that.
Okay, we have a question from Reina.
Hi, y'all. My name is Reina Kapelani Pahulu. I'm Hong Leiti from America. So it's interesting to hear the conversation surrounding, the Pacific. And it's emotional just because, I'm 25 now and I never got to experience anything like this. So thank you all for that. And just, I felt like a common thread throughout the conversation was like kind of combating these Western ideologies and frameworks of, understanding self and queerness or transness, however you want to nuance that. I feel like, even being in Australia and New Zealand, your sister islands to our Pacific. So you are operating in a Western framework, but the U.S. is so far removed from our homelands, and I never got to experience anything like this again until this time in my life. And so it's I'm sure there are a lot of frameworks and ideologies that are Western to the ways in which you all operate. And so, I find myself at a kind of a rock and a hard place because I'm trying to connect back to you all and the way, like the beautiful ways that you're able to experience community and your livelihoods, but that's just not always the most accessible and feasible thing for us as Latinos here in the U.S. I'm sorry for crying so much, but I just, I don't know if many of you have been to the U.S., but like, how do we, because Western colonization has a way of like cutting us off from our ancestral ties, and so we don't always feel one with those things. And like as an American person, because I've been in America all my life, how do I like you know, how do I bring the balance between the two, especially for the generations coming up who, like me, didn't get to see anyone like you all. Thankful for the internet that like gives us the space to connect in this way. But again, it's been 25 years now that I get to experience something like this. So it took a very long time in my mind to have any inkling of like peoples that represent my wholeness. And so, yeah, I just being here in America, like how do we make that possible?
It's thank you so much, Raina, for your question. It's the age-old question for us who are migrants, right? Who migrate from our homes into different spaces. I can only say this, that you being a Le'iti, your Le'itiness, right, is not an identity. It is about people. It is about you as a person, right? You carry that wherever you are. And if you're in the United States, there are organizations like Utopia Seattle and so many other organizations that are doing amazing work in the United States for brown and Pacifica, queer people of color. Step out your comfort zone, go out there and meet some people and join online. It starts online and you've taken the first step. And look, seriously, Phylesha, Joleen, Becks, and myself, we all know your pain. We all know your pain when we see, that you want to connect, but you're so disconnected. And we haven't even touched on the issue of settler colonialism and how that has impacted our lives, as Pacific Island LGBTI people of color. So my love and respect to you for wanting to reach out, but I am telling you that hole in your heart, it will be filled very soon. And you will be able to bask in the sunshine of your Le'itiness, and you'll be like wearing that as a crown everywhere you walk within the United States, okay? I'm sending you so much love and respect.
Big hugs to you, Raina, and I just also have a read of my reflection, because I pay homage to Samoan Fa'afafine, because I too, like you, did not see my reflection in anyone else around me. I struggled, sort of being raised and understanding that Indigenous people to Aotearoa New Zealand are Māori people, and then how I fit within that context or that narrative, and because I didn't see anyone around me that was trans, I was often defined in ways that I didn't connect with. And so I went looking, and it was just by mistake that I found Fa'afafine, who I saw my reflection in for the first time. So I think it's also in moments of time like that, around exactly to the point what Ymania was saying, that it is fundamental to relationships. And my greatest influences and mentors in life have been the very key people that I've seen my reflection in. So hold on to the fact that you're not alone out there, and how can we support you in your journey, how we can connect you to the journeys of others that are there. Online is a fantastic thing, but I just want to acknowledge your tears, and I just want to acknowledge also the power in your voice, and please connect with us so that we can continue to just support each other through all the different things that we have to contend with.
Raina, there is a Utopia San Francisco group, and one of our former president of Tonga-Ladies Association, Henry Aho, has just recently moved back to San Francisco after his contract in New York. And he's gonna be there with the Utopia San Francisco, or wherever. There's quite a few Utopia organizations that you can reach out to, who has all our all our familiar identities that you would like to reach out to, and so you can find yourself being loved by all of our Pacifica family, and like Phylesha said, you're not alone. We're just a click away, and you're most welcome to connect with us anytime. And if you need to talk, or have a person to talk to, we're here.
And Raina, we're also privy to a lot of resources and things that are probably not out there in the virtual space. So if at any point you feel like there's something that you want to connect with regarding literature or anything, just send me a message. I'm happy to connect you with some, bodies of knowledge or literature that exists out there that might be difficult to find in the virtual space.